Chair. Okay, Chair Ali Sullivan, you can let me know when we're ready to go live. But I believe we can go ahead and do roll call votes tonight for the minutes, the 2 sets? Yes, okay.
Recording in progress.
That never gets old. Good evening, all. Welcome to the December 8th Planning Commission meeting. This meeting is being conducted consistent with AB 361, Government Code Section 54953E. The Planning Commission meeting includes teleconference participation by all members and/or the public if they so choose. We're conducting the meeting using Zoom. It's also being streamed live on the city's website and on the city YouTube channel, so hopefully we'll have plenty of viewers out there and the public listening in. And all members of the public have the opportunity to submit emails to city staff, and we've received written comment from city staff. So at this point, why don't we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, then we'll get on to the roll call. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Ms. Monaconch, would you mind taking a verbal roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Stevens?
Present.
Commissioner Goldstein?
Here.
Commissioner Roach?
Here.
Commissioner Lowe?
Here.
Commissioner Bonilla? Absent. Chair Ali Sullivan?
Hi, President. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Why don't we go ahead and start with any public comment. As a reminder, public comment is for items that are not listed on the agenda, and we welcome comments from folks, obviously in a respectful manner and with a 3-minute limit. It does not appear that there's anyone here to provide public comment in person, and so I would ask Ms. Monaconch if there's anyone on the Zoom platform wishing to provide public comment, if she can moderate that portion of the meeting for us.
We do have one public comment by Ms. Ro Aguilar.
Wonderful.
Give us one moment, Ms. Aguilar. We cannot hear you in the council chambers, please. Please give us just a moment. Can you please try speaking one more time?
I'm here.
Thank you.
Wonderful. There we go.
Okay. All right. As this is the last meeting of the year, I want to make a comment on several planning commissioners' frustration with state regulations on affordable housing. First of all, the state has had to intervene because the locals are not doing an effective job of solving the housing issue. I think that's apparent. We are in crisis. The state has sent billions to locals, and there's only a 2% improvement in homelessness as a result of all that money being sent. That's not a very good record. I would like to ask you, where are Hayward's homeless tonight? We have over 400 people that need shelter, and this will probably be higher in 2023. I urge you to advise the council to buy or lease more hotels, motels, more annexes we need for the homeless, especially over the winter months, which we are in right now. And I wish you all happy holidays and look forward to getting back together again in January. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Appreciate that. Ms. Monaconcha, is there anyone else in the public that's wishing to provide public comment at this time?
Yes, we do have one more public comment from SHNA.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Gabriel Altamirano. Can you hear me, by the way?
Indeed, we can, yes.
Yes, my name is Gabriel Altamirano. I'm with the South Hayward Now, South Hayward Ahora. We're a community activist group formed in South Hayward and advocating for the protection and enhancement of the South Hayward area. We do have some concerns that we want to raise regarding the St. Regis project. We spoke a couple of nights ago at the city council meeting, and the assistant city manager took the position that there will be no planning approval and or any CEQA review. It would be exempt from CEQA. And we disagree. We feel that under CEQA, with the increased intensity of the use, it would be considered a project, it would be considered having adverse impacts. And I just could not imagine a project this size not going through the Planning Commission for discretionary review. Also, we're very concerned because this was not announced. There were no formal notices online. The only hearings that occurred are regarding the grant funding. So we wanted to bring that to your attention, that we feel as a community that this project should have discretionary review before the Planning Commission. There should be approval before this sovereign body, and there should be some sort of CEQA review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Monaconcha, do we have anyone else wishing to provide public comment?
That was the last speaker that I have.
All right, seeing no one else virtually or in person, we will close public comment. All right, so we will move on to our first item of the night. Tonight is a work session, so we will not be acting on this presentation. We'll have our staff report, and then we'll have commissioner comments and questions all together afterwards. So I think do we have the honor of Jeremy presenting to us this evening?
It's actually going to be Housing Manager Christina Morales who will be presenting.
Virtually?
Yes.
Got it. Wonderful. All right. So the first item tonight is the Affordable Housing Ordinance Feasibility Study. It'll be a review of it and discuss findings and policy recommendations for us. So Ms. Morales, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to review the findings and recommendations from the analysis, the feasibility study for the Affordable Housing Ordinance. I'll actually be handing it over to our consultant shortly, but just wanted to kind of remind everyone how we got here. So the City Council had identified evaluation of the Affordable Housing Ordinance as one of the priority items for their strategic roadmap back in 2020. And in March in 2022, we started the process by looking at the outcomes and the performance of the existing Affordable Housing Ordinance, which was modified in 2018. Based on the recommendations from the City Council and feedback from the Homeless Housing Task Force and the Planning Commission in March of 2022, we contracted with Strategic Economics to do a feasibility study with the purpose of trying to maximize the amount of affordable housing that could be produced by our Affordable Housing Ordinance. So I'd like to introduce Derek Braun from Strategic Economics, who will be giving the presentation tonight on the findings of the feasibility study.
Thank you, Christina. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Give me just one moment to get my slides up. Okay, hopefully you can all see the slides. Ping me if you can't.
Yep.
Great, thank you. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present the results of our study of the Affordable Housing Ordinance. I'm Derek Braun. I'm a principal with Strategic Economics. And we're joined tonight by other members of our team, Dina Belzer, our president, and Chris Holcomb, who has been leading much of the analysis in this project. Strategic Economics is a land use and urban economics consulting firm located in Berkeley. So tonight's an overview of the presentation tonight. The purpose of today's item is to review the findings and recommendations of our policy analysis of the Affordable Housing Ordinance. So I'm going to open the presentation with a brief overview of the existing Affordable Housing Ordinance, what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do, and then get into the findings of our analysis and the recommended changes that resulted. Okay, so what is the Affordable Housing Ordinance? Well, essentially, this is the policy of the city that links market rate housing production with affordable housing production. This is the policy that dictates the percentage of housing units that are associated with a market rate housing project that need to be affordable to to households at lower income levels. So this, just to reiterate, it applies to new market rate housing development projects. It does not directly control, however, the types of projects that are proposed. That's something that's determined through your zoning and through your land use regulations. Whereas this is about what happens when those market rate projects are proposed. The Affordable Housing Ordinance specifies the share of units as part of the project, housing units that must be deed restricted, affordable housing units. That's the inclusionary requirement. It also specifies the affordability level of those units, whether they're moderate income, low income, very low income. It specifies the in lieu fees that can be paid instead of providing the units on site, as well as other alternatives to providing those units on site. And I'll get into the details of the existing ordinance in a moment. The ordinance, as Christina said, she mentioned, was updated in 2018. I believe the last study was around 2017, 2018. And at the time of that last update, the in lieu fees were increased and the inclusionary requirements in the AHO was applied to smaller projects. So currently it's 2 or more units in a project and the Affordable Housing Ordinance applies. The last update also increased the flexibility for other means of compliance besides the inclusionary and in lieu fees. The AHO study had a few goals. It's seeking to ensure affordable housing production. And as part of that, the goals were to revise the inclusionary housing requirements and to revise the in lieu fees in order to optimize the potential to produce affordable housing. And really, it's always a good idea to restudy inclusionary housing requirements and in lieu fees because market conditions change over time, of course. And the feasibility analysis tests the relationship between market conditions, the amount of market conditions, and how much affordable housing can still be supported while those projects also still move forward. So the process for doing this analysis included obtaining community input and a lot of the results from that, also working with the technical advisory committee of local developers, conducting a financial feasibility analysis of the Affordable Housing Ordinance and potential alternatives in order to test the ability to deliver affordable housing in conjunction with market rate housing, to recommend policy updates, and then also we use the calculation of an affordability gap to recommend in lieu fee levels. And the affordability gap basically refers to the cost of producing an affordable housing unit, so that's what the developer would be paying, a market rate housing developer would be paying to ensure that the city can use the in lieu fee revenue to produce affordable housing units if they're not provided on site. We are approaching the conclusion of this longer process. So we've held 2 meetings with our technical advisory committee. We've conducted our community outreach. We have presented preliminary results at the Homelessness Housing Task Force and received their input. And that has all led up to the recommendations that you're going to be seeing and commenting on today. So before I dive in more deeply, I touched on this just a little bit earlier, but I want to explain how and why we look at financial feasibility in order to ensure that the AHO is achieving its goals of producing affordable housing. So I'm going to start with some nuts and bolts kind of ideas here, but as we know, what residents can afford really varies by their income level. And housing costs are considered to be affordable to a resident when they are 30% or less of that household's income. and anything above that in households are considered to be cost burdened. Currently in Hayward, you can see in the bar chart on the right side, 24% of renters are considered 24% of households overall who are renters are considered to be cost burdened, and 14% of households overall are owner occupied and also considered to be cost burdened. So there is a need for this affordable housing, of course. There are two primary means of producing affordable housing. So on the left is the idea of this tax credit project. This is essentially that 100% affordable project built by an affordable housing developer. And when one of those projects is being built, there is, we have the costs in the right column. We have the revenues and the supportable value from those revenues in the left column. And when you're building a 100% affordable housing project, there's a funding gap challenge. So filling this gap is where you start to get tax credit revenue. And it's also a way to deploy any in lieu fees that are generated by the affordable housing ordinance for developers who might have paid the in lieu fees. On the right is the inclusionary housing picture. And so inclusionary housing really is driven by market forces, which is why we have to look at the financial feasibility considerations. Because in essence, as the requirements increase for inclusionary housing or in lieu fees, the total supportable value of the project will decline. And so what we are trying to accomplish with the restudy is to ensure that that this value will still allow projects to proceed while at the same time ensuring we are maximizing how much affordable housing is being produced while those projects move forward. So as I said, market rate housing projects do need to be financially feasible in order for this to work. They are feasible when their revenues exceed the project costs, as well as the required investment return, which is really a function of market conditions and expectations. So developers only build when projects pencil or are financially feasible. Now, a lot of the costs and revenues in this picture are really outside the city's control. But there are a few places where the city can make some differences, which I'll cover in a moment. But at the end of the day, ultimately, the need to study financial feasibility, the need to restudy inclusionary requirements is because this market demand is going to set the price that buyers and renters are willing and able to pay. That will vary a lot depending on factors like what type of product is in demand, where is it located, how desirable is the location, what are the other local amenities that drive what people are willing to pay to live in a location. So I mentioned that there are a few policies and incentive tools that can be used to adjust the feasibility of a housing project for a market rate housing project. And so these include things, actually some of these apply to affordable housing as well, I should point out, but these include things like policy levers, such as parking ratios. If it's possible for developers and the market to support lower parking ratios and your requirements allow that might reduce some of the construction costs of the project to support its feasibility. But again, if you reduce those parking ratios too low, you might wind up actually diminishing the value of the project that the future residents would be willing to pay in terms of rent or sales prices. Sometimes additional density, bonus density can provide a boost to the overall market value of the project. The impact of things like that bonus density really depends on whether or not getting additional density actually increases the value of the project or just drives an already infeasible project to be less feasible. It depends on whether or not you can actually achieve greater net revenue as a result of the density. And then there are other options such as reducing city fee requirements and streamlining approvals to create greater certainty and to reduce holding costs for properties. So that's my quick sort of 101 of the financial feasibility part of this. But let's move into the examination of the performance of the current AHO. And then also we'll move into the findings of our study for potential modifications. So what is the current policy? Well, currently Hayward requires for the inclusionary housing set-asides, rental housing requirement is 6% of the units need to be affordable units in a market rate project, with 3% of those affordable to households at very low incomes, 3% of those available to households at low incomes. Then the ownership requirements, there's some nuance in them. The current requirements are all based on achieving moderate income affordability for either 7.5% of higher density projects, so 35 dwelling units per acre and above, which is, you could think of this as above townhomes, you start to get into multifamily products. And also 10% requirement for properties at less than 35 dwelling units per acre, which is typically single family homes and townhomes. And this policy was put in place at the time out of recognition that it was very challenging to achieve financial feasibility for multifamily properties that were condos. They just haven't really been getting built in Hayward. There are alternative means of compliance, such as paying in lieu fees, constructing units off-site if approved, or providing some other alternative proposal for compliance, such as land dedication if it's approved. So what are the outcomes? Let's look back for a moment here. So what we did is this chart on the left here shows the current inclusionary requirements for Hayward. And what you can see here is that we have renter in orange, owner in blue, and here's where you can see that 6% inclusion requirement for renter. And then this is just an average of the 7.5% and 10% for owner occupied here. But basically you can see that compared to these other cities that we examined and their policies, Hayward has a relatively low on-site inclusionary policy, but Hayward is actually producing more inclusionary units than many other communities, despite or perhaps because of these lower requirements. There's a possibility that these units are getting produced because Hayward's lower requirements allow more projects to move forward. And what you can see here on the right is the on-site units, those inclusionary affordable units that were permitted between 2018 and 2021 in these cities. And you can see really only Hayward, Concord, and Fremont have been successful in producing inclusionary units with these policies. Now, Fremont has produced a large number of units with their policy, but of these cities, Fremont has essentially the strongest housing development market. So Hayward has achieved a lot of success with its existing policy, although we can always do better, and I think that's what the study is really all about. Now, I should also point out a nuance of inclusionary housing requirements. They're especially helpful for producing moderate income housing. It's one of the few tools that cities have to accomplish this. So on the left here, what this chart shows is Hayward's RHNA requirements, regional housing needs, allocation requirements for the 5th cycle that we're coming out of, and then the 6th cycle that we're entering for the new housing element. And you can see the estimated compliance numbers here. You can see there really has been sort of the least success with producing the extremely low or very low income units and the moderate income units. And the moderate income unit story is partly one of, there are very few funding sources available for that because typically outside funding sources target low, extremely low and very low income housing production. And then you can see on the right here, the units that were permitted 2018 to 2021, by income level and by how they were delivered. You can see that in blue, very low income and low income units were primarily produced through 100% affordable housing development. And in orange, low income and moderate income units were primarily produced through moderate income units were primarily produced through inclusionary requirements. Now on the 100% affordable projects, again, the in lieu fee revenue generated by the AHO potentially contributed to these projects as well. So the takeaway here is that this in lieu fee revenue, as I just said, it does provide a major source of local funding for those 100% affordable housing projects. It was Hayward's second largest and Fremont's largest source of local funding for 100% affordable projects. Hayward's largest other sources were Alameda County Measure A1 bond revenue and public land contributions. But here on the right, you can see the share of local funding by source used to build those 100% affordable projects, 2015 to 2023. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, Hayward's local source here, was, as I mentioned, the second largest source of revenue. And some of these public land contributions are not necessarily an ongoing source or may not play as large a role going forward. So there is a need to generate additional revenue. Okay, so that was sort of the retrospective. Now let's look forward to the findings of the analysis that Strategic Economics completed. So what we did with our studies, we examined the financial feasibility of several different development prototypes, both under the existing affordable housing ordinance without any requirement. So that's one. Then the other was without any requirements. And then we also examined with the in lieu fees that are currently required, just to see the current performance in today's development market. And we looked at several different development prototypes, from single family homes, townhomes, and condos for ownership, and then 4 different variations of rental projects that are at different levels of density, development intensity. And so this chart here, which is very complicated, but this chart here shows basically in this light gray bar, this is the land value that needs to be supported by development activity. This is the price per square foot that the market requires to be paid for land in Hayward, and it's given as a range here. And then the bars themselves show the results in terms of the price per square foot of land that could be supported under each of these scenarios and each of these product types. So for example, if you look at single family development, you can see that without affordable housing requirements of any kind, you can support a $78 per square foot of land value. If you look at the existing inclusionary requirements, it's 66. If you look at existing in lieu fee requirements, it's 67. And this all falls within the gray band, meaning that these projects could support typical land values in Hayward. Same for townhomes. So what we found ultimately from this analysis is that only really single family homes and townhomes are consistently feasible under the current requirements in Hayward. And even without the requirements, for the most part, it's still just single family homes and townhomes. We did look at this in several different ways. We looked at various market tiers for submarkets in Hayward, but this is sort of the big headline takeaway. It's mostly single family homes and townhomes that can support higher requirements. We found smaller rental projects are largely infeasible under the current requirements, and that higher density rental projects are infeasible even without the requirements. As you can see, they are negative residual land values, as we call it, and definitely not able to support even existing requirements or no requirements. So this slide actually, if you saw your packets, this was accidentally deleted from the version in your packets. I apologize for that. But we brought the initial results forward to the Homelessness Housing Task Force and got the reaction. And they favored increasing the ownership inclusionary requirements, seeing that that still has some potential room to support higher requirements. So ultimately, the direction received included to maintain the existing rental inclusionary requirements, since those products don't pencil right now. And at the same time, there was no desire to reduce the requirement. So the recommendation was to retain that 6% inclusionary requirement for rental projects. They also directed that we maintain relatively lower inclusionary requirements for high density housing products, including those higher density condominium products, which also do not currently pencil. And then they directed us to increase the inclusionary requirement for single family homes and townhomes with the intent of approaching the maximum supportable while also accommodating changing development conditions over time, knowing that this is sort of a snapshot right now doing this analysis. And there was also a general preference to make sure that there are on-site inclusionary units for projects at or above 20 housing units in size. We also, as I mentioned, completed some, staff ran some community output and community engagement processes at 2 fair housing workshops and a housing fair. And ultimately, there were 18 respondents, and they prioritized a set of potential priorities. And they ultimately, the top priorities that emerged were ownership housing and targeting specific incomes. So in order, the top priorities were ownership housing, prioritizing middle income households, prioritizing extremely low income households. And then behind that came prioritizing mixed income housing and new developments, and then rental housing. And there were 5 other options that received fewer votes. So what we found with our analysis, including a sensitivity analysis subsequent to the comments from the Homelessness Housing Task Force, is that single family and townhomes can support a 12% inclusionary requirement, with half of that at low income targeting low-income households, and half of that targeting moderate-income households. So this provides a deeper level of affordability than the current requirements, which are only moderate income for ownership. It also increases the requirement for these products up from the current 10%, we're increasing to 12%. This just shows our analysis, which found even with increases in construction costs, the feasibility remains comparable with some changes over time. We got some reaction from the technical advisory committee that there are also a lot of financing challenges with housing development right now, and we took that into consideration in the analysis and some adjustments to the recommendations. So on the inclusionary requirements, again, no changes in the rental requirement and a recommended revised affordable housing ordinance. We're not recommending changes to the higher density ownership requirement. What we are suggesting, we are recommending that for housing products at 35 dwelling units per acre or less, the requirement is increased to 12%, up from 10%, and that the affordability levels now become 6% low income and 6% moderate income. The last piece of this is the identification of in lieu fees for the developers who do not provide on-site units, and this requires consideration of multiple factors. So one consideration is the affordability gap, which is really just a way of saying what's the cost for a 100% affordable housing developer to produce a unit at a comparable level of affordability. There's also ensuring that homes can still be built, the same development feasibility consideration. There's also the consideration of other communities in lieu fees, which also applies to the inclusionary requirements. You don't want to exceed the levels found in other communities that are immediately adjacent or in similar market conditions, lest development activity be driven to those communities. And then there are policy considerations such as encouraging whether or not what you're doing is encouraging or discouraging in lieu fee payment versus providing on-site units, since the priority we've heard a lot is on-site inclusionary units. So taking all that into consideration, and also we looked at total fee cost as a share of total development cost, trying to strike a balance here between generating revenue while also matching incentives to provide on-site units versus in lieu fees. And also trying to simplify fees to make sure that they're readily applicable across a variety of project types. Where we landed with our recommendations is to, first of all, with rental units, maintain $21.64 per square foot. Again, this comes from the desire to not reduce requirements that we heard from the Homelessness Housing Task Force, but at the same time acknowledging that rental projects cannot currently support really any fees, or just not feasible at this moment. On the ownership front, we're maintaining $17.85 per square foot based on the same sort of set of guiding principles that we heard. And then for the single-family homes, townhomes, those products at less than 35 dwelling units per acre, we're recommending increasing the fee to $26 per square foot. And these fees ultimately really are within the range of other communities that we examined as well. They're on the higher end, but this is a more recent study. So just to recap, summary recommendations is maintain the existing inclusionary requirement for rental products and higher density ownership products. Second, to increase the ownership requirement for lower density housing products to a 12% total requirement with 6% low income household, targeting 6% moderate income households. Third, to increase the in lieu fee for ownership products at less than 35 dwelling units per acre, so those single family homes and townhomes. And fourth, to maintain the existing in lieu fee for condominiums at those higher densities of 35 dwelling units per acre or higher. Now, so next steps, of course, tonight, we're going to be hearing your feedback and answering your questions. I'm excited and looking forward to our conversation. We will ultimately be making any final refinements or exploration based on your comments tonight, and then producing our report. And this will then go to a final report and the City Council hearings. And with that, I'm going to close out this presentation.
Thank you very much. Pardon me, before we start with questions or comments, Ms. Morales, was there anything else that city staff wanted to present or touch on this topic?
Yes, thank you. I think just a few reminders of information that's been provided in the staff report that I think would be helpful. Looking at the city's displacement study, one of the items that was identified as an area of need was that there's a gap in units, a supply gap for units that are priced below 1,250. So that's kind of the very low and extremely low income category where Hayward residents are at risk of displacement or homelessness. And when we look at that in the context of the affordable housing ordinance, we're seeing that the ordinance itself and the inclusionary part of the affordable housing ordinance is more successful at producing the moderate income units, and that the fee revenue is what we are able to use to produce those units that are targeting very low and extremely low income households. So we see based on the ordinance, we have a couple of mechanisms to produce affordable housing and trying to maintain that balance. Also, in our discussions with the developer, we heard a great need to maintain flexibility because projects can vary on a site basis. So one site may, for example, be more appropriate to pay the fee on, while another site would be more appropriate for having the on-site units. An example of that might be a large lot single family development where they're building 3,000, 4,000 square foot homes. You'd get very few inclusionary units on that parcel, but you would get a lot of inclusionary housing fees that could actually subsidize substantially more affordable units. So looking at that in terms of flexibility and allowing the developers to do that analysis, and also a lot of desire from them to actually include the affordable units. Some of them had actually stated that their preference is to provide the affordable housing when it's feasible, but wanting to maintain that flexibility. And in terms of our community outreach, what we saw was just a very wide variety in terms of what people need. So we have diverse needs in the city. And so we need an ordinance that is going to be able to touch on all those various needs. And so anytime we make an ordinance very strict, we'll be closing the doors on opportunities for creating different types of housing opportunity. So I just want to leave you with those thoughts. And I wanted to thank Derek and Strategic Economics and Dina and Chris for all the work they've done in this process. It's been very informative and very helpful in kind of understanding where we've been and what opportunities we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morales. Thank you, Derek, for the presentation. Very in-depth. I'm sure I have a couple questions, but why don't we go ahead and start with, seeing as we're all in person here, I'll turn to my left, Commissioner Lowe.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I wanted to say, first of all, the presentation was very thorough and it was very informative, so thank you. And I'm going to jump right into my questions. So my first question that I have is, I know you said you're surmising that Hayward is producing more inclusionary units than other communities because we have lower requirements. Have you looked more closely at Fremont's policies or ordinance to see what they are doing and to see if we can mirror what they're doing to produce more inclusionary units while maintaining higher requirements?
So we have actually pulled together detailed information on all of those comparable cities that we looked at, including Fremont. And they actually do have very, very high requirements, both in terms of their in lieu fees and their inclusionary requirements, especially for ownership households or ownership housing products. What I can say is Fremont, as I mentioned during the presentation, does also command very high sales prices and rental rates. And I don't have those numbers on me, but they tend to be higher than many other communities that we looked at, including Hayward. And that's something we could pull in more detail. But it does appear that that is part of what's allowing them to have a lot more housing in general sort of move forward, including a lot of multifamily housing, such as around the Warm Springs BART station.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at as it relates to that is they seem to, I understand that demand higher prices, but it does seem like there might be something in their policy that we can glean from them and adapt to our ordinance that might help us to have a little bit higher requirements than what's recommended. Because I'm a little concerned, we're going from 10%, I believe, to 12% requirement as far as the recommendation is concerned. And for the single family homes and townhouse homes. And so my questions related to that are, it seems to me like because we are only modifying this ordinance every 5, 6, 7 years, what was the process that was used to make sure that these numbers, and even the numbers as it relates to the fees, the in lieu fees, that these numbers are will keep up with inflation? How far out did you project as it relates to inflation? Because it does seem to me like 12% seems a little low.
That's a great question. So first, I just want to mention that the requirement is not just going. It's not just going from 10% to 12% overall, but also changing from within that number. It's no longer 100% of that is just targeted to moderate income households. We are also splitting it, so now it's 6% to moderate income households and 6% to low income households. So that in itself is also a fairly significant change in being in adapting the policy to target lower income households than it has historically. Now, in terms of projecting forward, we did the sensitivity analysis looking at increases in construction costs that might happen. We did a few other sensitivity analyses around interest rate changes, but really so many development conditions are so uncertain and going to be changing that there's a limit to what we're able to do with that projection. So our goal really is to make sure that we are leaving just enough room in this policy so that as development might become a little less feasible, it will still potentially work. If development does become more feasible, then at least that will be generating additional housing units or in lieu fee revenues. The question of inflation, really the effect of that right now is it's driving up the return requirements for lenders to market rate housing developers. And also in a lot of ways, what we're hearing all over the Bay Area right now is that the capital markets are starting to really freeze up and make it very uncertain times. It adds further to the complication of the question of the future as a result.
So then what is the thing that made you choose 12% as opposed to 14% or 16%?
So what we landed at 12% is, we did the analysis that showed that if for example, increases in hard costs of construction were to go up by 2% or even 5%, the single family homes would remain feasible or marginally feasible. So it's still likely that they would be produced. Now at the construction cost increase level of 5%, townhomes with this modified inclusion requirement did dip into sort of the range of being likely to be infeasible. So we didn't want to increase this much further than that out of the risk of it pretty quickly seizing development and resulting in no production of inclusionary units if construction costs were to increase dramatically or or sales prices were to decline a little bit.
So townhomes would become infeasible beyond the 12% is what you're saying. Is that what I heard?
I don't remember exactly where that line was for the study as it was performed, but certainly with a fairly modest increase in construction costs, they could become infeasible if we looked at a 5% increase in construction costs.
Okay. And then my last question, well, I think it's my last question. And this might be more for staff, but I wanted to find out, I'm a little confused about with the recommendations. I know we have incentives and bonuses and all of those things for the developer to try to get them to create the units, the affordable units, instead of paying the in lieu fees. Does our, do the recommendations include the city having the discretion as opposed to the developers having the discretion? I'm very concerned if it's all about whether or not the developers, if they get to have complete and total discretion to decide when to build or versus when to pay in lieu fees. It seems to me like the city should have that discretion.
So I would say that based on our research and our discussions with the developers and looking at feasibility and how construction costs can affect feasibility, I think the developers were concerned that a 5% increase in construction costs was fairly low. They're seeing that on an annual basis. And so having that flexibility improves feasibility for the project because they have options. Also, what we're seeing in terms of the projects that are choosing to do on-site inclusionary units is they tend to be naturally without the city choosing the larger projects. So right now, projects that have been entitled or have submitted applications under the new requirements, there are 19 projects that have chosen to do on-site inclusionary units, and the average project size is just under 80 units per project, and a total of 1,480 units, which would be, it's about 144 inclusionary units. The projects that are choosing to pay the fee, there's about 25 of those projects, but the average project size is about just over 6 units, and a total of 156 units in total. So the number of units that are actually scheduled to pay fees is very low, and it's those small projects that actually create a lot of burden for staff in terms of negotiating affordable housing agreements, monitoring for compliance. The developers are usually smaller developers with less experience. So those are the projects that we are looking at in terms of really trying to encourage that they pay fees, because we need the fees in order to produce the units for lower income households, very low and extremely low income households. And the fees are also necessary in order to pay for the staff that does the compliance monitoring for the affordable housing ordinance. So we think that just deciding that certain types of projects should be scheduled to pay fees, it not only reduces the flexibility for the developer, but in terms of staff to try to negotiate what types of projects are really best suited for paying fees versus providing those on-site units.
This is Jennifer Ott, Assistant City Manager. If you don't mind if I just chime in a little bit, I just want to say developers, because every site that comes in for a development project is different with different conditions, different developers that have, like Christina said, different experience, sophistication, financing. A lot of times they need flexibility to be able to respond to the very specific conditions of their deal, their transaction, and their site. And so I think if we took that flexibility away from them, it would be harder. We don't have that expertise, and we don't have the due diligence on every single parcel the way that they do and understand the financing transaction the way that they do. And so it is really valuable to them to be able to have that flexibility. Now, we want to create the requirements that make sure we're producing housing either through fee leveraging or through on-site. So we definitely want to have those requirements, but giving them some flexibility allows them to move the project forward more feasibly and maybe more expeditiously as well.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you. So I got a couple quick questions. So in a world where developers compete or they're looking to develop projects, you know, the city of Hayward is competing with Fremont and Union City. How does changing these rules change the developer's perception of ease of development, or potentially changing these rules? Do you have a sense that they might choose a different community to build their projects?
I think that you hit at the heart of why we perform this analysis in the first place and why we also perform that analysis of looking at what the requirements are in other communities nearby or in similar market conditions. You know, if we do, the city adopts inclusionary requirements and in lieu fees at a level that still allow development to proceed, it means that there's still incentive for those developers to produce housing in Hayward rather than say, well, it no longer pencils there. I'm going to go to an adjacent city and work there instead. So it is certainly the intent of this to find the sweet spot in which the projects will still move forward and you will still get those inclusionary affordable units or in lieu fee revenue.
Thank you. And I guess, you know, we're trying to predict the future, which I is nearly impossible. And I guess there's a couple things that I heard. We talked a little bit about, you know, cost increases in the construction economy. And, you know, I think we were talking 5%, which, you know, if we looked from, I don't know, April of 2022 to April of 2021, the California construction index, I think, went up 25%. I think it's now coming back down to something a little more reasonable. But I guess if I'm a builder and I'm trying to predict the future and I'm looking at very high inflationary construction costs and I'm seeing interest rates that are increasing and I assume our housing prices falling, like how does that all like fit into this? It seems worrisome to me that, you know, we're changing rules when we're going into a very, very, very mysterious future.
I'd like to start, maybe Derek, and then you're welcome to come in. I will have to be honest with you, I think staff is too. We are wanting to kind of balance the desire that we've heard from a number of commissions and policymakers that we should do more. And so this study and our recommendations are walking, we believe, a very fine line. And that was before we had some of these results before we've heard we're an impending recession. And so we've been trying to walk that fine line. And now with an impending recession, we think those chances of us pushing this over the line and impacting housing production are even greater now. So honestly, we agree with you. I think what we think based on the analysis, the feasibility studies, the strategic economics, we're walking that fine line and we can marginally increase the inclusionary for the ownership products that are of lower density. But we're really concerned that if we do a lot more, then we will impact production and potentially have the exact opposite effect that we're intending with this policy.
So just to ask another really kind of dumb question, so let's just say that everything stayed the same, but maybe you changed the percentage that went to, I don't know, moderate or sorry, I forgot the term. It was 6% went to moderate and the other 6% went to what category?
Low income.
Yeah, so what happens if you change that threshold and you kept it at 10%, but you changed the threshold
to like 5 and 5%?
Yeah, something like that. Like recognizing that doesn't address some of the concerns that other community members have mentioned. Like, I mean, that seems to be more consistent with what kind of the unknowns that we're moving towards. Is that an accurate statement, or am I way off?
I mean, that would improve right? So that would make it less likely to impact feasibility because you would be keeping the 10% instead of the 12%, but then splitting it between low and moderate. So that would make it less of a cost impact to development.
That's absolutely right.
And then my final question is, when you look at the different communities in the Bay Area and you look at production rates and you look at, you know, Fremont and Hayward being, you know, pretty successful at that, Fremont, of course, right, has a higher price per unit, so that explains that. But do you think some of it is Hayward's geographic location and the employment centers on the peninsula on the South Bay? Do you think that plays into this?
It certainly would be reasonable to believe that there's some effect of that. Fremont is a major employment center, as we all know, and Hayward has many jobs as well. But Fremont it's very well positioned in terms of transportation connections to have a very strong and large job base. So it likely factors into some of the market considerations for why they might have higher housing prices and rents.
Thank you. I really appreciate your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
Please, go ahead. Commissioner Goldstein.
Thank you. I'm looking at slide number 19, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around this.
As am I.
Glad I touched on something of mutual interest there. Yeah. So I see where the gray bar is, and that looks like the typical range of land prices. That part's pretty clear. The other color bars are based on whether or not there are affordable requirements in there. And but then what do those numbers represent? Are those numbers, for example, if we're just looking at single family development, would that $78 be the per square foot cost to build, or return on investment? What does that number actually represent?
Yes, that's a great question. So the approach that was taken to display those results is it's called a residual land value analysis. And essentially what you're looking at with that type of analysis is you are subtracting, it's basically what's left to pay for land after you subtract project costs from the project sales price and required return on the investment. And so it's sort of like once you have paid for the project and then you sell it, it's sort of the gap between those construction costs and the sales price of the project, and then dividing that out across the land area is how you arrive at the residual land value.
Okay,
so that's yeah.
Sorry. So that then explains why something like a 5-story podium would be in the negative dollars, because the cost of construction of such a structure would be so expensive. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah.
But this is still representative of a per square foot?
That is right, per square foot of land area. So essentially the residual land value, what a higher density rental product could actually support in terms of paying for land after you account for the value of the rents it would receive versus the construction cost and return on investment required, it's actually a negative number. And so this is showing that negative number divided by the land area.
So it's kind of a scary realization. It basically says that these products shouldn't be built. So why do people build them?
Yes, and so we have been looking at that, and I think that a lot of the projects that are getting built that are higher density rental projects right now were permitted under the previous inclusionary housing requirements, is under the former iteration of the Affordable Housing Ordinance prior to 2018 or 2017.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And also just quickly, the Lincoln Landing project, which is our most recent market rate multifamily project, also is an opportunity zone. And we know that they were able to take advantage of some federal financing, tax benefits that helped them kind of get it over. They struggled and actually sat on their building permits for many, many months because they couldn't get the financing to move forward. And then finally did because they were able to get some of this federal finance, figure out these opportunity zone financing, and that was how they were able to push it over to the edge. And that was using the previous affordable housing fee numbers.
I got you. So in order to make any of those 5-story type or multifamily or condo type structures work out, they'd have to have some kind of gift in financing or purchase. Is that correct?
There's a lot of different ways that they could wind up penciling. And, I think that with any kind of analysis that looks at development prototypes, we're looking at sort of one typical scenario of development, but any individual project might come in with unique circumstances like that, like the Lincoln Landing circumstances where they had, less impact on the revenues because they are under a different inclusionary housing requirements. They had all the other advantages that Ms. Ott just pointed out. So yeah, that's all part of it.
Okay, all right, very good. So this is a great representation of feasibility, but it doesn't include some kind of outside funding, some federal or state funding to build these types of units. This is all just based on if a builder came and decided to buy the land and what construction costs would be. Am I saying the right thing?
Yes, that's correct. If it was receiving, it's sort of supposed to model the typical market rate housing project, which does not receive any kind of low cost funding like that.
Okay, all right, fair enough. By the way, it's a very thorough analysis that you've done here. It's a really great job. Really appreciate it. Good job,
Thank
staff. You. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldstein. Commissioner Roche.
Thank you. When you arrived at the 12%, was there a range? Like, was it 10 to 15? And you really did the analysis, and it seemed like 12 was the sweet spot.
Yes, yeah, that is right. We actually looked at several different inclusionary requirements ranging from, I believe it was maybe 12, I think it was 10% up to 20%. We saw the impact and feasibility of each of those requirements. We looked at different variations with just moderate income units versus the low and moderate income split. And ultimately, based on the feasibility results, as well as sort of the policy guidance that we've received coming into the project and from the Homelessness Housing Task Force, that's how we arrived at incorporating the low income requirement and also increasing the inclusionary requirement while leaving a little bit of room for changing conditions.
Okay, so I mean, was there a feeling that, well, it could be 13%, but really I guess it's like, was it a hard, no, really 12 is the stopping point?
With all the background I just gave, yeah, ultimately 12 was basically the stopping point.
Okay, and then maybe this is a staff question. I know in the past, because I don't know, someone told me that there was a study done in the past that looked like the market could bear like 15%, 20%. Now I know conditions have totally changed, so 12 seems like a moderate answer to that. So I'm just wondering, maybe Jennifer, Christina, you can answer that. Was there a feeling in the past that we could go a little bit higher on ownership inclusionary?
I think there's always produces, when they do these studies, they always produce a range. But then what they accompany it with is a sensitivity analysis to see how much increase in costs can be absorbed by a project over time to make sure that our requirements continue to be feasible. So I do believe the prior study, I don't remember what the numbers were, they proposed something similar to what's being proposed now, where we had a range and we decided that because of market conditions that it was better to be lower than the maximum, because when you choose your affordability requirement at the maximum feasibility, you increase the risk that the production of housing will be affected by changes in market conditions. And I think when we look at the results of our neighboring cities that have these 15% inclusionary housing requirements, but they're not producing any moderate income units for their ownership units, we're concerned that, especially when neighboring jurisdictions like San Leandro and Union City that have similar median incomes as the city of Hayward, that get the similar rents as the city of Hayward, we get concerned that if we take it too high, that we're going to have that same effect of slowing the market and developers deciding to develop housing in Hayward. And the result would be that we get no affordable units. And I think balancing that line and making sure that we are sensitive to the changing market conditions and knowing what we know about the economy right now, that there is some concern that going on the aggressive side in these market conditions might cause constraints to the production of those ownership units that we've been successful at producing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I just wanted to know a little bit of the history there. And then I just wanted to ask, because I couldn't remember, in all of the housing types, does the developer always have the option to choose in lieu or inclusion? Built in?
Yes, they do.
Okay, because I was reading in the staff report, it said that for projects under 20 units that there was it says readily accept in lieu fee as opposed to as opposed to encouraging inclusionary. And you know, and looking at our numbers in Hayward, that you know we have built more inclusionary than several of our neighbors. And maybe this is anecdotal, but it seems like you know some number of those inclusionary units did come from these smaller projects, at least since I've been on the Planning Commission.
Yes, there are a number of projects that have been entitled that are smaller projects that will produce inclusionary units. Our experience with working with some of these smaller developers is that it actually takes a lot of staff time and effort to negotiate the affordable housing agreements, to educate them on the affordable rents that are required, what's required in terms of marketing and management of the units. So it takes a lot of staff resources. We have one individual who is really responsible for overseeing the compliance with the affordable housing requirements. So having a lot of small projects producing very few units is going to be a substantial burden on the staff, especially if there's no fee revenue coming in to pay the cost of the staff to do that work. And I think also what we're seeing is we get projects entitled, but they don't necessarily get built. So we're not seeing a lot of those projects pulling permits. And so there's still, you know, the underlying concern as we look at the feasibility for the rental housing projects based on this study. When we see that pause between getting your entitlement and getting built, we know the developers are looking for financing. And the longer that takes, the kind of less likely or the more concern we have that those projects may not actually get built.
Okay, so are you, I mean, is this sort of like softer language proposing a bit of a policy shift to say, you know, readily accept in lieu fees and not try to push for inclusionary in the small projects based on?
I think at the beginning we were really expecting that we wanted to have, I think we were hearing from the council and the Planning Commission that we wanted something definitive and that we wanted to say these small projects, we're just going to say, okay, if you want to pay fees, you pay fees. And then the bigger ones, we were going to require that they do the on-site inclusionary. As we went through the conversations with the developers, hearing their desire for flexibility, but at the same time, as we were working on the density bonus, came to realize that there's probably also a need for flexibility for the smaller projects that choose to access the density bonus. So we wouldn't want staff to be constrained and say, no, you have to pay fees because you're a smaller project. If the developer actually wants to do 2 or 3 units, get a density bonus and increase the number of overall units in their project and produce more housing. Okay. So in conjunction with the 2 ordinances, we thought it might actually, what we had was probably the ideal situation. And we can discuss with the developers what we think is the best approach, like we have been doing, and seeing how it is kind of played out that naturally the smaller projects have been paying fees and the larger projects have been doing on-site inclusionary. It didn't seem like a lot of intervention was necessary in order to require that those large projects do the on-site inclusionary.
Okay. Okay, and then, you know, in the staff report under the developer section, when you talked to them, there was this comment about loosening requirements regarding implementation of building, because they wanted to build, you know, provide the on-site units, but wanted loosening requirements regarding how to implement that. Is that what you're talking about?
Let me see, refresh my memory on what the implementation, I think that was actually, that may have been in reference to the on-site, the 100% affordable developers wanting the city to allow them to use the tax credit rents instead of the rents that are produced by the health and safety code. Okay. So that's something we would really have to evaluate with our attorneys as to whether or not we could actually use the tax credit rents for those projects. In terms of a project that uses a density bonus, they have to use the health and safety code rent for at least 20% of the units. So it would take a little evaluation for us in terms of flexibility. And then I think that comment was also in regards to a perception that we required the developer to use a specific organization to market the units. And in reality, it was the previous owner of that same development that selected the company that was doing the initial marketing and sale of the units, it wasn't a city requirement. But it is good to note that in terms of when we're implementing this, what kind of flexibility they want. I think it's only to the extent that they are will affirmatively further fair housing and that they will market equitably to all of Hayward residents. I think we would still hold firm on those concepts that we want to make sure that all Hayward residents have access to these units. So things like that, we probably wouldn't be more flexible on. But in terms of trying to work with them to enter into agreements, we would probably look at those in terms of flexibility.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then I guess my last question is just like focusing on lieu fees. Like if the rental properties are really not feasible at all, whether there's affordable requirements or not. And I mean, as far as collecting lieu fees, how does it work? I know I've asked this before and I just need a refresher. All of that money goes into a pot. Is that just for Hayward or is that regional? I mean, how does that money get pulled together to build these 100% affordable units?
It's just for Hayward. So it's money that's restricted by the affordable housing to produce affordable housing units. So we can only use that money in order to increase the number of affordable housing units in the city of Hayward. So the affordable housing ordinance itself restricts the use of the funds. And what we've been doing is we've been having a notice of funding availability to allocate those funds. And in subsequent years where we had projects that had funding gaps, we sought council approval to allocate the additional funds that we had available to close that funding gap so that we could move forward with those affordable housing projects. And as a result of those decisions, we have one project that just closed all of its loans in November and will be starting construction very soon. We anticipate another project will be closing mid next year. And I think the third project actually started construction last year. So we were able to move forward with 3 affordable housing projects.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. And I really appreciate you answering my questions. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, Commissioner Lowe.
I was just wondering, based upon what you just talked about with Commissioner Roche, can in lieu fees be used by the city to buy like hotels to house the unhoused?
So there is language in the affordable housing ordinance that says the funds can be used to subsidize projects that serve populations that are experiencing homeless if it is determined that that use will offset the impact of market rate development. So unfortunately, I don't have a very direct answer for you. It would require some analysis if we chose to use it for that target population. We are, though, able to use it in the affordable housing developments that target extremely low income households and that provide permanent supportive housing. I would like to mention in our experience in working with the Home Key project and receiving submittals from some of the hotels that were interested in selling their properties, we are looking at an increase in the sales price of those hotels, which affects the feasibility of whether or not the city has sufficient money to be able to acquire a hotel. And in relation to the amount of affordable housing in lieu fees and the sales prices I've seen on acquisition of these hotels, it wouldn't be enough money to acquire a hotel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Obviously, a significant amount of data went into it. It was bringing me back to my economic classes back in university. So I appreciate the analysis there. The analysis is clearly well thought out. What's important, I think, is really what conclusions you draw from the slides that are presented. And a couple of conclusions I am drawing that I wanted to raise on, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, and I appreciate Commissioner Goldstein for raising this. On slide 19, the conclusion that I'm drawing is that we should not expect any rental units to be built in Hayward going forward, which to me seems slightly shocking and also problematic. Is that the same conclusion? And that's saying even right now, without any affordable housing ordinance requirements, no high density pencils out and very few smaller rental projects pencil out with the current affordable housing requirements. I'm curious, Ms. Morales, I mean, do you take that same view based on this analysis? Because if that's the case, losing out on rental property development in the city, I think is a significant problem. We should be targeting both rental and home ownership on the affordable side. And if the existing affordable housing requirements preclude the ability for any type of rental to be developed, we are not making any changes to the rental piece of this, which we can question in a moment.
So I think that was some of the concern that we brought up in March earlier this year, that what we were seeing is not many high density rental projects being proposed. And so we were concerned about the feasibility. And so this study does reinforce the idea that it is going to be difficult to build high density rental housing in the city of Hayward. I believe in previous iterations of this analysis, I believe the rents would need to increase about 40% in order for rental housing to be feasible in the city of Hayward. However, what the Affordable Housing Ordinance does create in terms of opportunities, if fee revenue is collected, then we can use that fee revenue to subsidize the development of affordable rental housing, so that we would be able to get a mixture of both the home ownership, moderate income, and low income households through the market rate development. And then we use the in lieu fees to be able to subsidize the development of rental housing, and also target the population that we've known from our displacement study to be most at risk of displacement and potentially homelessness because of the affordability concerns in the city. So there's still two opportunities there. And so in the meantime, when the market conditions are such that the market can't produce rental housing, that's when we can look to the affordable housing developers to fill that need.
And just to, if that's okay, I just want to put a finer point on that. I mean, I think, what is it, almost 800 housing units, Christina, that we have multifamily rental housing being built in the city of Hayward, but it is mostly 100% subsidized, affordable housing that's subsidized heavily by public subsidies. Or in the case of some of the city's own land, parcel group 3 or parcel group 8, you're looking at about 400 or almost 300 units of multifamily residential housing. So we're seeing the product, but it's heavily subsidized.
And to play devil's advocate here, was any thought given to reducing the requirement on rental projects?
We did consider that at the beginning. That was the initial proposal we put forth to the Homeless Housing Task Force. We did receive some concern from EBHO about reducing the requirements because, in essence, it's not going to change the feasibility because our requirements are such a small percentage of the development costs. And to considering the point from EBHO and also considering the fact that it's minimal effect on feasibility, we want to make sure that the city is in the position when rental housing is feasible that we can either collect the fee revenue or have the on-site inclusionary units when the market does change to a point where rental is feasible. Also, since we do have some of those small rental projects in the pipeline that have been proposed, we also wouldn't want to lose any of the potential fee revenue or on-site units for those if we just all of a sudden remove the requirement.
That's fair. I guess the next sort of conclusion that I'm drawing here, obviously the impacts are entirely going to be on basically low density projects. What are we actually seeing built here in Hayward? Because as I think back on the 2 years of being on Planning Commission, the vast majority of projects that have come to us have been of the higher density type versus single family or lower density. And so I'm curious, are we increasing the affordable housing ordinance on a type of product that is not being built in Hayward, and therefore we're not going to actually achieve any increase in affordable units, or is this indeed a product that is being built and I'm mistaken here?
Afraid I don't have any data on hand, but we definitely do have some products that have been approved recently, such as La Playa Commons. Trying to think of some other projects, but that are not subsidized at all. Oh, we have a True Life project, about 50 units of townhomes. We're actually, quite a few units have been up for sale for the single family and townhome models. Right now, the Mission Crossings we just are in the process of selling 14 affordable units that are associated with that project. Okay. La Playa will provide 6 units of affordable housing, and the True Life, I believe, this one is Parcel Group 2, will be providing 20 units of affordable housing, and then the second True Life project, I can't remember off the top of my head how many units, but it might be another 5 units. So we do have going forward, we'll be seeing more of that product type becoming available. In terms of new submittals, I'm not quite sure, and maybe Jeremy might have a sense.
I was going to say, Jeremy, because my understanding is a lot of the new market rate development is townhome development, and so maybe Jeremy, you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of, in terms of development that's in the pipeline right now, majority of what we see is in fact the townhome style kind of development. Most of those would constitute like a small lot kind of detached type of unit. Most of them are under 50 units in total, so they're, in terms of their sheer number of new townhomes, they're relatively small. In terms of like the market rate rental projects, Maple and Maine was recently entitled. They are proposing some affordable rental units, but that is not firmly under construction yet. And so, to Christina's point, we're not seeing a lot of the new rental market come forward yet. But there are a lot of, given the market, we have seen some projects that have slowed down a little bit. I think just given the temperature of the economy and kind of where the financing hurdles remain. But it hasn't cooled off. There's still a lot of construction, and mostly what we see currently being built were entitled pre-pandemic, and so they're now they secured their financing at a time a couple years ago when the rates were low and the construction costs were low, and that's what we're typically seeing being built right now.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. The last conclusion that I'm drawing from this, and Commissioner Stevens, I appreciated your comments regarding the impact that that these types of policies will have, and really how to create the right incentives for development in Hayward. It strikes me again, looking at slide 19, literally what a fine line we're balancing here. And I think city staff have heard from commissioners over the last couple of years our desire to see an increase in affordable units being built in the city of Hayward, and I think that desire remains. What's very clear, though, is that the desire coupled with the economic reality might not be perfectly aligned here. And so that's what is a bit troubling, just that, much as we might desire this type of development, we could create an ordinance that required 20% or 25% inclusionary housing and have the highest levels in the entire East Bay or the entire state if we wanted, and could tout that and not have a single unit be built, right? And so how do you balance policy versus actual effect? And I'm hoping that these proposals will lead to a positive effect. Obviously, the economic realities are going to make that uncertain going forward. So thank you very much for the presentation to the outside consultants and to city staff. That's all the comments that I had. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have further questions or thoughts or comments. Wonderful. Seeing none. Thank you all joining remotely for that presentation. Again, we appreciate you bringing it to us and all the work that went into it. Jeremy, did you have something else that you wanted to raise?
Yeah, did you want to open up the public hearing in case members of the public would like to speak on that? That would be great.
Thank you very much. I totally forgot about that. Ms. Monaconch, why don't we go ahead and open up the public comment on work session item number 1. I don't believe there's anyone in the chambers that would like to speak. So we'll turn to you if there's anyone virtually that has raised their hand to speak.
We do. The first speaker is Ms. Ro Aguilar.
Wonderful. Ms. Aguilar, please.
Okay. My appreciation to the staff for the excellent report, which answers many of my questions. I am focusing on owner-occupied inclusionary affordable housing because that type of housing is most effective in increasing and strengthening the middle class. If I understand this economic analysis correctly, I have a suggestion for a compromise for the inclusionary affordable housing issue. As I read the findings, it appears inclusionary single-family townhouse, which we've been talking about, can be profitable under current affordable housing requirements, especially with the many incentives offered by the city in the draft density bonus ordinance. So we're seeing that townhouse single-family developments can do inclusionary affordable housing in the moderate and low income range. If the council were to require on-site affordable housing for the specific category of single-family townhouse owner-occupied housing, within a certain optimum, like the 20 to 35 that we've been talking about, 20 to 35 dwelling units, as a trial, why not try it for the next 4 years to require on-site affordable housing within that range and within that specific category, and not raise the percentage, but every development would have to have affordable housing, and the decision-making would go back to the council, not the developer. And seeing that this category is profitable, if the profit isn't a barrier to building on-site affordable units, then the low number of owner-occupied inclusionary units to date must be primarily a result of anticipated community opposition. Without deed-restricted affordable housing, moderate and low-income people are being barred from home ownership. And with gentrification, such as the Oak Street townhouse development, only market rate houses are being built, pushing out lower income families who live in the neighborhood now. If the developer is required to build inclusionary affordable housing for the aforementioned category, there is no backing out, and the city council can focus on addressing concerns rather than considering the option of rejection. With greater certainty for the developer comes acceptable investment return. I urge the Planning Commission to recommend council and staff explore this model, and hopefully the city of Hayward will become a leader in the creation of much needed owner-occupied inclusionary affordable housing. Let's house Hayward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Ms. Monaconch, is there anyone else?
Yes, we do have one more speaker, SHNA.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Gabriel Altamirano with the South Hayward Aoda Community Group. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, it muted again. Yeah, so I wanted to echo the last speaker's comments about the need for housing for low, very low, and extremely low. And the ABAG's regional housing needs determination for low, very low, and extremely low makes up almost half of what's required, 40.8%. And I understand your reasoning as to making recommendations for in lieu fees for these lower income rates or for lower housing rates, but from my perspective, it seems as if it's the same policies. The city is taking a position to build these more higher, moderate, above moderate units. And we should be very careful about that, because I understand that the numbers aren't panning out. However, to just, stop recommending inclusionary and saying paying an in lieu fee for low, very low, and extremely low, that sends a really, at least from my perspective, a bad message. And I hope the planning commissioners hear this and discuss it further, because one of the commissioners brought up this issue that, why aren't we continue to recommend, what would it hurt to initially continue to recommend that these units are built? And if that's not feasible, then, there's the option to pay the in lieu fee. But I think it sends the wrong message. And also something other is that's concerned is accountability with the in lieu fees. And, it'd be nice if this commission at some point discussed what community members can do to make certain that these fees are being spent appropriately, to hold the city and developers accountable. Also concern is, so those are my concerns, the recommendations for in lieu fees versus recommending, that they be included, and accountability of the in lieu fees. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We do not have any more speakers.
All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment on this item. And I guess I'll ask my fellow commissioners once more if there's any other thoughts or comments before we close this out. Yep. Commissioner Lowe?
Thank you, I appreciate that. Real briefly, well, for me, briefly. So ideally, I understand the staffing issues, and I understand what staff was, I do understand what staff was saying as far as making sure that they have enough staff so that they aren't overburdened by there being too much discretion put on the city as opposed to the developers. But ideally, I think it would be great to see the developers build the inclusionary housing excuse me, and for the in lieu fees to be at the discretion of the city. In other words, in lieu fees are never worth as much as a new inclusionary unit, or it doesn't seem like it. So if I'm wrong about that, please correct me. But so it seems like the in lieu fees should be the exception, not the rule. I don't know how much more lenient we are than our neighboring cities, and I definitely understand the fear of going too high. I have the same fear as well. And it seems logical that as long as we continue to be less strict than our surrounding cities, developers will still choose to build here. I'm not sure if that's an overbroad statement or not, but I just want to make sure that we're not being so cautious that we are not maximizing what we could do as it relates to affordable housing. But again, I definitely understand the issues. I agree with the issues. I'm just concerned about the things that I just said. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lowe. Appreciate it. All right, why don't we close out the first item. Again, thank you to city staff and to our outside consultants for that presentation. Appreciate all the work, effort, time that went into coming up with these recommendations. All right, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. We have approval of 2 minutes. Ms. Monaconch will be taking a hard roll count, if that's fine with you. So the first item, minutes from the Planning Commission meeting of September 8th, 2022.
I will move that item.
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second.
Okay, and the motion maker was Commissioner Stevens,
Commissioner
and the
Stevens.
seconder was Commissioner Lowe. Thank you.
Commissioner Lowe, yes.
Okay, so to start with a roll call vote, Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Commissioner Goldstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Roach,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonilla absent, Chair Ali Sullivan.
Abstain.
Thank you.
All right, the motion passes. Let's see, the next item of business is the approval of minutes of the Planning Commission meeting on November 10th, 2022. The draft minutes were attached for everyone to review. Do I have a motion?
Motion to move it to yes.
Wonderful.
I'll second.
Commissioner Stevens and Commissioner Roche, we have a motion and a second.
Okay, Commissioner Stevens,
Abstain.
Commissioner Goldstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Roach,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe,
Yes.
Commissioner Bonilla absent, Chair Ali Sullivan.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Motion passes. The minutes are approved. That's great. As we are finished off with our formal business, why don't we move on to commission reports? And I will first start with Jeremy. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Commission. Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that this is Commissioner Roche's last meeting as a planning commissioner. She has served on the Planning Commission since 2019, and prior to that, she was a dedicated commissioner for the Community Services Commission, and she served in that capacity since 2015, I think you were appointed to that. So we wish her all the best, and congratulations to her position being elected to the City Council. Also wanted to let the commission know that we did receive the resignation from Commissioner Okenda, and that was received in November of this year. And on Tuesday of this week, the City Council appointed Ms. Artie Gard, who is currently serving also on the Community Services Commission. It looks like we get a lot of great candidates from that commission, so we are very grateful of her interest. The council did formally appoint her to the Planning Commission, and we would be assuming that she would be starting with her first meeting with the commission at our next meeting in January, which is January 12th. In the meantime, we are, just for the commissioner knowledge, we are going to be working with the city clerk's office to complete a special recruitment to fill the vacancy of any of the commissioners that are going to be leaving the commission. Shortly after that happens, we will also be proceeding with the election of officers for 2023, which I expect to be sometime in January. So be prepared to elect the chair and vice chair at the meeting coming up relatively soon. A couple of other quick announcements. The next commission meeting, which typically is the second and fourth Thursdays, but the next commission meeting on the 22nd is being canceled in lieu of the holidays. So there is no meeting, second meeting in December. The next regularly scheduled meeting is planned for, as I mentioned, January 12th. And as of right now, we do have an item, possibly two items, that will be presented before the commission that evening. So do look forward to that coming out shortly around the holiday break.
Bring us some meaty ones.
I'm sorry?
Bring us some meaty ones.
That's right. And the last one is just to wish everyone a very safe and happy holidays coming up. There's a couple, regardless of whatever religious holidays you would like to celebrate. I wish everyone, hopefully, including the commission and members of the community, have a really safe and pleasant holiday season. And we will see everyone next year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before I pass off to other commissioner announcements, two things I wanted to also reiterate. First off, I wanted to wish all of my fellow planning commissioners a wonderful end of year. It's been a wonderful 2022 working with all of you. I know we've gone through some back and forth with in-person and virtual, and I think we've made the most of it. So it's been a pleasure. Greatly appreciate all the work that you guys put into this commission, and my being able to participate with the four of you and our fifth colleague who's not here right now. And then the second thing I wanted to just raise is to congratulate, of course, Commissioner Roche. It is sad that this will be your last planning commission meeting. I'm sure we'll turn it over to you for some comments, but I just wanted to thank you for welcoming me to the commission over the last 2 years. As someone who's been on the commission much longer than I and has served the city much longer than I, I'm very proud to see the work that you've done with the city, your dedication to the city, and now the continued dedication that you are putting forth and the rewarding, I should say rewarding, I don't know if it's a reward or not, by the citizens to be moving forward onto City Council. So you'll certainly be missed on Planning Commission, but I wanted to thank you for your personal friendship and your professional mentorship over the last 2 years for myself and to all the work you've given to the Planning Commission. So thank you very much. Commissioner Roche, do you want to?
Yes, I just want to thank everyone. Of course, I'm thrilled to be moving on to City Council, but I really enjoyed my time on the Planning Commission with all of you and getting to know you. I think that we've had some great discussions, and I've learned so much from all of you. And I've learned so much being on the Planning Commission about the city, and I feel like I go into this next step with much more experience than I would have had I not served on this body. So thank you all for all of your input. I've learned a lot. Even when we've disagreed, it's been so helpful. And I'm going to miss it. I really liked getting my packet on Friday and sort of going into each project and driving around the city to find the projects. And it was just an incredible learning lesson on this Planning Commission. So thank you all. I wish you luck with your new colleagues, and I will, of course, be watching.
Please do. Further commissioner announcements? All right. Seeing none, we will move to adjourn the meeting at 8:46 p.m. this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Recording stopped.